every single boss has some trash that they want to pull on top of it. So if you have the additional difficulty of the boss being tyrannical, it becomes more and more difficult, but at the same time you want to pull more trash on top of the boss if it's tyrannical to have more funneling damage onto the boss to make sure it doesn't take that long. So we'll see what kind of risks both Incarnation and Team Name are going to be taking in this Sanguine Depths, and how well it's going to be working out for both of those teams.
That's right. Game number one's getting going right here as Incarnation and Team Name square off in Sanguine Depths.
Both teams on a similar plan here. It's going to involve those Moonkins. A lot of value coming out in this dungeon. We actually saw some of it coming out from teams in the Last Stand tournament as they were progressing through there. But it's cool to see that both Incarnation and Team Name have landed on this, and they are starting with some large pulls. Wow.
And Yoda is playing Venthyr Moonkin, while Kuri is playing this Kyrian Moonkin that we've been talking about earlier. It's very similar to the Rasta Druid playing Kyrian, where you have this legendary that basically gives the person and yourself 10% secondary stats depending on which covenant they are. So very interesting difference here. Both of them playing Druid, but a different kind of Druid. So Incarnation is going to have more burst whenever Yoda has that Venthyr 3-minute cooldown available in combination with Incarnation, and Team Name is going to have more consistent damage because the Kyrian cooldown is only a 1-minute one, so that's going to be more frequent damage from Team Name.
Yeah, it's also a little bit clunkier, right, on Yoda's side, because he really needs to make sure that he's going to be getting full value out of it for a whole, 40 seconds of his ramp, right? Whereas on Team Name's side, it's a lot more flexible. You just kind of press button, and you don't have as much importance on making sure that the Incarnation just goes perfectly. Here we see, though, the teams are getting started. Crix is the Voracious, pulled for both teams. Cryptix, though, instantly going into Pod Tender here. That's going to be bad news. He was carrying a lot of their AoE damage here, and this Necrotic is now stacking up on Dorky. Dorky is going to die. The B-Res comes out from Yoda, but Dorky now not having threat on anything. The trees are going to come down to taunt everything. Dorky's taunted the boss, but all the other mob threat is still a problem. Chasing the rest of the group, you can see they're sort of running away here. Cryptix now going down as well. Growl and Yoda soon to follow. This is going to be a full wipe. They're just trying to get a little bit more trash before they end up going down, but it's not going to work out. Incarnation taking 6 deaths and not getting much to show for it, while Team Name having 0 deaths so far in a commanding lead already.
Yeah, this is actually a disaster for Incarnation, as they lose not only the Bloodlust and the 3-minute cooldowns from Yoda on that Moonkin, but they also lost the Lantern buff as well. So they're gonna have to go a lot slower now. Thankfully, that Tormentor does not regen HP if you wipe. So you can see Arcolaf still being on that slither of HP that unfortunately they didn't manage to finish off. If they actually would have managed to finish off this one, they probably could have maybe even recovered that pull, because they ended up dying at the very end from a cast from Arcolaf going through, not having an interrupt left to deal with that. So very unfortunate for them. It looks like they're still engaging those brutes though that they didn't manage to finish off, and they might even pull it on top of the boss, but they have to be very careful without those offensive cooldowns available. And that's the problem with the Venthyr Moonkin, right? If you have a problem like that, then you're going to lose all of your damage. Yoda is not going to be doing much damage at all for at least 1 minute 15 until his cooldowns come back up. Team Name, though, on the other hand, they are done with Crixus now, and they're going to be moving on, as they already dealt with that Tormentor. They pulled it on top of the boss, so they don't have to go backwards.
Yeah, this is kind of a double whammy here for Incarnation, because not only are they going to have to do this boss slower, because they don't have the Venthyr Boomy ramp, but by the time that does become off cooldown, they might not even be allowed to press it, because they might need to be saving it for the next time it's assigned in the dungeon. And so, oh no, Dorky going down again for Incarnation, and they don't have any battle reses available at this point. Looks like Dorky might have just gotten slapped by the boss, perhaps with no demon spikes up, at the same time as some damage coming out from one of those brutes. Ends up just going from 100 to 0 in no time at all. Junkrat is going to finish off, though, that brute, and they're going to reset the boss. So it's not the biggest loss ever for Incarnation, but it's certainly not great, as bad sort of does turn to worse here for them. We are probably going to be looking at something like a 4-minute loss on this first boss split compared to Team Name. So it's going to be really tough for Incarnation to make this back just with a better route and clean play. They're probably looking for something to go wrong on the side of Team Name now.
Yeah, definitely. All eyes on Team Name now, as they have been clean until now. But Sanguine Depths has so many things that can happen and so many things that can go wrong because of all of these pulls just being so dangerous, on top of also dealing with Necrotic and Tyrannical. Looks like Team Name is dealing with Varuth and the mini-boss here. So this is definitely a little bit of a conservative pull compared to the pulls that we've seen before from other teams. Definitely going a bit slower here. It's either intended to go slow or they actually decided to change this up depending on what they now realized happened to Incarnation. Igloo, though, going down to a frontal from that mini-boss here. They decided to commit a battle rest for speed, and probably also because there's a lot of trash that is skipped, so not sure if Igloo even had an invisibility potion to come back to the group.
Yeah, and they wanted to do this big pull here, and they weren't going to drop combat because they've taken the mini-boss into this lantern, but Lepan going down, and because they use that battle res on Igloo, they don't have another one available here. They are going to try and make this work. They do have trees for a couple more seconds, and now, though, is going to be entering that pod tender. Lepan hits the release button, and they're going to maybe try and kite this out, but this is so catastrophic here for Team Name, and this is exactly the opening that Incarnation needed to see for Team Name. Team Name now are going to be adding those deaths to the death timer, and that will help even things up on that side. And they potentially, I think they opened the lantern as well, which is really, really bad news, because that lantern, once opened, can't be closed again. And so now they're going to have to do this entire area much slower because they won't have all those stacks.
Yeah, that is actually going to cost them quite a lot of time. Not sure if it's going to be as much time as Incarnation has lost already, because you can see the boss split here. It's at least 3 minutes that Incarnation has lost already from Crixus. Not sure if Team Name is going to be losing as much, but close to, right? It's definitely accumulating, like the mistakes that they've been making and not having that lantern buff from here on out as well. So Team Name definitely has to make sure they're not making any more mistakes if they want to stay in the lead here in this game. The Shackle's actually also not getting interrupted here by the Warden, and Lepan going down again. I'm not sure where the rest of the team was, what happened, but they're just falling apart here. It looks like Igloo is not incumbent, thankfully, so they can get the mass res up. But yeah, just more issues for Team Name. And at this point, Incarnation has more than enough time to catch up if Team Name is going to continue to make these mistakes.
Yeah, so Team Name's still 16% in the lead. They're about even on the death timer, but the key resource they're lacking is there's one less lantern that's going to be available for them. So if Incarnation are able to make good use of the lantern that Team Name won't get to have, then that could easily make all of that percent back up, and we could be looking at a tied game here. But that's still going to rely on Incarnation perfectly executing some of the very hardest trash in this game. When we were watching the Last Stand tournament, this was by far the thing that cost the teams the most of their time in that tournament, was working on this trash section between the first and second boss in Sanguine Depths. So really heavy technical difficulty check here.
Yeah, for sure. And you can see Incarnation is dealing with the trash by getting the lantern buff as well. Yoda does have cooldowns back up now, so that means that they can do a pretty significant pull if they want to. The Ashen is not ready yet from Yummy, so they have to be careful with the incoming damage from these trash packs. But it looks like they're pulling the Ruth and the mini-boss on top of some other trash. This is very likely because of Yoda's cooldowns. They've bent their cooldowns being so strong for Moonkin, so whenever they have them available, they can do things like this. But the fear actually gets hit, and Yoda is getting feared by that Varuth aura. It wasn't close enough to the people, and now he's got the curse from some of those mobs on him. Looks like Dorky is dropping incredibly low as he now got rid of that necrotic, but he's going down now after the buff has been removed, and they don't have a battle rest available. They cannot get Dorky back up. They're trying to kite out this pull, but I don't think it's going to be working out for them, as they just don't have a battle rest. So just mistakes from both of these teams, and you can see just how explosive this dungeon is. Just one small mistake and everything's just falling apart.
Yeah, it's rough here for Incarnation, but they can't stop trying to catch up here. As we saw from Team Name, it's not a flawless run on their side, and in fact, they are off of their route. Lepan taking a lot of damage here as well as they try and kite these mobs out. do get a necrotic reset here, but he's still so low on health, and it is starting to stack up again on him. A Castigate is lining up with all these other mechanics, and an Igloo goes down, Curry down as well, and Team Name are going to be having another full team wipe. We are now going to be at 12 deaths for both teams. Both teams still very much in it here. Incarnation still behind on count, but still ahead in that they have more lanterns available to them than Team Name, who are now all out of lanterns and are going to have to do this boss the old-fashioned way.
Yeah, this is actually really bad for Team Name and Incarnation. I mean, at this point, it almost seems like both of the teams just have to like take a breath and possibly go a bit slower. This is one of those dungeons where if one thing goes wrong, then your pulls are just not going to be working out anymore. The pulls that you have planned, it's not going to work. You don't have those lantern buffs anymore to execute these pulls. You're just going to have to go slower. So whatever they're trying to do at this point is not working out because of the previous swaps. It's just like a domino effect, basically. And that's why all of these swaps are happening. So at this point, they have to make sure they go a bit slower. They even should commit Bloodlust because they have lost so much time, both of those teams, that they can probably even use an additional Bloodlust in the dungeon. It's going to come up in 35 seconds. They should maybe even commit it to one of these pulls unless they need it for the third boss. I'm not sure if they have assigned it for that, but yeah, it looks like Incarnation is not going slower. They're not listening to my advice at all, as they're going in and just pulling a lot of this trash on top of the mini-boss as well, with a Warden and some of these scribes too, so huge pull coming in by Incarnation. And Yoda's just holding on to these cooldowns for so long at this point. It looks like he's holding on for this for like 6 minutes almost. Wow.
Yeah, this is the rough spot. When the plan starts falling apart and your event there, Moonkin, you just don't know when you're actually supposed to press your buttons anymore. You know, if you do what you suggested and slow everything down to, you know, this pace of let's cut these pulls in half, which I actually don't think Incarnation's doing, but even still, they're kind of off of their timing that they're used to. Then, all of a sudden, none of those pulls are worth pressing Ravenous Frenzy on, right? And he's just like, what am I doing here?
Yeah, and you can also see those neutral mobs all being enraged as well. I wonder if the druids are trying to soothe as many as possible, but they're just not getting off all of the soothes because the mini-boss has been alive for so long at this point. Looks like Team Name is, again, fighting Tarvold. But keep in mind, fighting Tarvold on a 21 Tyrannical without any lantern buffs, without any bloodlust that you want to commit because you want to save it, it's really not that easy. Usually they're cleaving this boss down with a bunch of trash, and it looks easy because, yeah, because you have all of these damage buffs, and it seems to be dying in like 30-40 seconds. But all of a sudden you don't have these buffs anymore, and you get more Castigates, you get more AoEs, you get more ATs spawning as well, and it just becomes more and more difficult. So we'll see if Team Name can execute this without any extra trash that they've already dealt with before.
Yeah, that is going to be the question here. I think they probably can manage it, but, you know, even without any trash, this boss on 21 Tyrannical, without a Lantern buff, you know, and without Bloodlust and everything, this thing can be pretty challenging. So you can see these overlaps start to be pretty scary. They are going to commit the Ashen Hallow from Igloo, so that should really help as they end up getting lower on this fight. But look over at the side of Incarnation. Incarnation going into this boss with a huge old 10 stack of the Lantern buff and a bunch of trash. A lot of damage going out onto Growl there. He also has his Blessing of Sacrifice active too. On Yummy Pala there, that's his character, the healer, and actually gets so low on health, but is going to be able to keep not just himself, but the rest of the group alive as well. They are going to be able to finish this boss up ahead of Team Name, so they are catapulting into the lead off of the strength of those Lantern buffs. They have more count on the board. They are ahead in boss percentage. Both teams tied at that 13 death counter, so that won't be a factor in the result here.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely crazy to think about Incarnation being ahead at this point. You can see the deaths 13-13. So the death penalties are completely irrelevant now, as both of these teams are even again in time after all of these mistakes that they've been having. But Incarnation, thankfully not losing the Lantern buffs, really gives them the advantage here on the boss. Team Name now also having to go back and deal with a bunch more trash because they had to skip quite a few. Oh, actually, they still have one Lantern, it looks like. Team Name has this additional Lantern that they have available. that they're just gonna get from... Actually, Incarnation has it as well. Okay, so they're both using this Lantern buff for the next boss. So from here on out, it should be more even. Because now both have the same... actually, Igloo and Lepan going down for Team Name on this pull. They do have one Battle Rush available, but they just instantly released because they have the checkpoint now after the boss went down. So they should be able to recover, but it's so hard for Lepan to get aggro back as Anda is going down too. And Mikkel, you can see with those necrotic stacks on him having aggro, and Kuri having the curse on him. He needed to dispel that as he's going down. And yeah, just more trouble for Team Name, unfortunately.
Yeah, and they saved this Lantern so that they could take a Lantern buff downstairs, just like Incarnation are doing. But with these deaths, they're not actually going to be able to get these stacks on everybody. Everybody dying with these stacks, and now these mobs are being kited away. I think they're still going to be able to get up to 10 here. Yeah, okay, it looks good. Team Name are still going to be able to get their stacks, but Incarnation now hugely ahead with the 4 extra deaths on their side as they already are pulling this boss with all the trash, with their 10 stack. It's going to be the Wings as well. No Ashen Hallow available. Ravenous Frenzy in 15. That'll help as soon as it becomes available, but until then, they're actually going to be in quite a bit of danger here.
Yeah, lots of damage coming out onto the group as well from this boss. This boss, generally a pretty difficult one in this dungeon because of all of the AoE that is happening. Of course, he can pick up these orbs, but even then it still has a lot of damage. Cryptic's actually proccing his seeds as he got hit by something, or a cast went out. I'm not sure what happened there. Did manage to survive as we recovered now. It looks like with Blessing of Sacrifice being used by Yami as well to be able to recover here. And Yoda cleaning up that trash with the Frenzy and the Incarnation as well. Cryptics, before dropping into that seed, also did a lot of damage to that trash. And you can see Yoda just ramping up, most of that damage being single target, so the boss is dropping incredibly fast.
Yeah, this is going to be a huge point where we'll get to see just how far ahead Incarnation have gotten at this point, when we can compare what the time is looking like when both teams kill the boss. Of course, 20 extra seconds are being added to Team Name's time as well, so that's a further advantage for Incarnation as a result of the 4 deaths separating the teams now. So Incarnation, probably when you factor that in, are going to be having something like a minute's worth of advantage as they finish off the boss and start heading up towards the rest of the dungeon. Shroud is going to be deployed here by Junkrat as they're going to sneak through these mobs. They don't need any count. They are going to perform a quick check to make sure they don't need anything else, and they're going to start the last boss gauntlet.
Yeah, they did skip a Stogadon, so that means they're going to have that extra 50% physical damage taken, which
scary.
Usually it's not a problem in most dungeons, but in this dungeon it kind of is scary because of that wicked charge, that bleed that you get once the boss charges on you. The initial damage does more, and also the bleed that stays behind does more damage, so they're gonna have to watch out for it. They have a lot of dwarves to get rid of that, and they also have Bob and immunities, so as long as the boss dies pretty quickly, they're gonna be fine. But we've seen some boss fights that last too long, and then you can just see the group is just falling apart, running out of those defensives. But we'll see how Incarnation is doing as they're dealing with that first part of the gauntlet.
Yeah, this is going to be it's all going to really come down to just whether or not they can make the boss work with all the extra tormented buffs, right? I guess just the 2, but still, that is scary. With reduced movement speed and increased physical damage taken, the boss just putting out so much physical damage onto the whole group throughout the fight if you can't dodge the mechanics, which you can't because you're slowed. So it's going to be a race against the clock for them to get through that, and they're going to have to use their movement abilities really precisely to just try and minimize the damage as much as possible. They will have every single cooldown, though. Even though it's 21 Tyrannical, with Bloodlust and a Venthyr Moonkin in cooldowns, that's actually going to be a huge advantage for Incarnation. They'll be able to do the boss just much more quickly than a team without that massive single target burst that the Venthyr Moon can provide. So it is just going to be pass or fail here for Incarnation. They have enough of a lead that nothing Team Name does. Even this huge pull you're seeing Team Name execute onto this Lantern, they just don't have the time to close this out unless Incarnation are going to have a wipe, I think. I'm actually not 100% sure now, looking at how well Team Name is executing this whole thing, though.
Yeah, it's interesting to see that both of these teams activated the Lantern so early. It looks like they are going to be able to refresh their buff and keep it for the boss, though, because it looked like it might run out for the boss, but because the Lantern is active for so long now after the changes to it, that they can keep it for the boss. Yeah, exactly. So they used it for this last pull and for the boss as well. They're going to be pulling the boss in just a second with the rest of the trash they still need. They need 8%, so basically everything that is left in this dungeon, and they have all of those offensive cooldowns available. The most important ones are going to be that Ashen from Yami Pala and also from Yoda the Incarnation, with the Venthyr cooldowns too. The Lantern buff is dropping though, you can see only half of the buff left at this point, so they have to hurry up and get to the boss to be able to utilize it.
Yeah, there you go. You see Dorky firing off the shield at the start here. That's good. You can press this button right at the start of the boss fight, that extra action button, and it will still be available when the Gloom Squall gets cast during the boss fight. So nice free damage reduction there. Good use as they're getting into the boss. Every single cooldown coming down. Cryptic's on top for now. That is going to start to change, though, as we do see Yummy, Pala, and Yoda really ascending on the meters with their cooldowns. The Venthyr Moonkin competing with the Holy Paladin, overtakes the Holy Paladin. The ramp continues. The Mage falls to the might of the Boomkin. 57% already on General Call Tyrannical. Everybody in the group is just doing so much damage. And even though it's this Tyrannical 21 key, General Call's already almost dead, but Yoda has been eliminated. As the Venthyr Moonkin there flying a little bit too close to the sun there with those chicken wings, ends up going down. But that's not going to be enough for Team Name at this point, with Incarnation still going to be able to get over the finish line. General Call just 1% left. Wow, this was what a game to start off with. Oh my goodness.
Absolutely crazy, and Yoda had already done his damage, right? So when he went down there, it wasn't too big of a loss either, as they're now finishing up the boss, and they're going to be winning that first dungeon against Team Name. And yeah, I mean, what a game, wow.
Yeah, Sanguine Depths takes no prisoners here, and both teams just having, the sloppiest game of the weekend that we've had so far. But of course, it's Tyrannical, Necrotic, Sanguine Depths here, Tettles. Of course, it's going to be a lot of deaths. It's going to be a lot of challenge for these teams, and they pulled through it and didn't fall into despair.
Welcome to Necrotic Sanguine Depths, I guess. It's just one of those dungeons that we talk about it being so momentum-based all the time, where if you lose, some cooldowns or you potentially lose, your Lantern buff, then you're set multiple minutes behind, and a little bit of throwing from one team, a little bit of throwing from another team, and it just culminates in a run where it just looked like through the first half of the dungeon, both of these teams were really off their game. In practice, both of these teams had 13-minute runs in this dungeon, and it just shows how fast things can go awry whenever Necrotic Sanguine Depths is involved.
That's right. And definitely one of the longest dungeons we have in our map pool as well. But yeah, I think it's just always a good example. We see it a lot in our regular cup play, and in particular Dratnos. So these teams, what happens when you make a mistake? What happens when you're not executing the way that you want to? We would sort of idolize, they have this perfect run, this is great, or only one death, but sometimes this is kind of the other face of MDI. Sometimes it's just two teams just fighting to stay in it.
Yeah, and the ability to recover, and to stay in the game and to keep the mindset of what do we do from here, what's the plan now? Those sorts of decisions, you see some teams where that sort of falls apart after the first full-on wipe, right? After the first wipe, Incarnation, they could have lost it if the next time they started having problems on Crixus, they just fully wiped instead of resetting the boss. That's something that a lot of teams would do in that spot. They'd just be like, it's cursed, drop the key, 2 chest the 20, do something like that, right? But Incarnation, keeping their eyes on the prize, keeping their mindset on what do we do from here, rather than, oh no, it's so bad that we're here.
Yeah, no question there. And Tettles, which of the wipes would you like to go over? All of them?
I think that if you watched both of these games, the front half of the dungeon looked very similar for both teams. Just a couple of issues with some tank deaths due to Necrotic and just the immense amount of tank damage that's happening with these brutes, with Crixus. We saw Dorky die, and then the rest of his group had threat on all of these mobs, and so they were able to get him rezzed back up. But they have a kick go off, and they just kind of get out of sync, where Team Name is able to get this pull dealt with pretty clean, and I thought that Team Name was going to be able to just kind of... It didn't even matter that they had a wipe at some points. I thought that they were going to still be able to kind of limp on by, just because of how bad Incarnation's first pull went for them, because of how well Team Name's first pull went for them. But Lapon dies on this pull right here. You lose your Lantern stacks. Notably, they'd already activated this Lantern, and this is going to be a full wipe with basically all of the trash still alive. There are a couple of spiteful shades there, but most of that trash is just still alive, running at the group. And both teams just have some issues in that Tarvald area, and this kind of throws back and forth. And then we see Incarnation eventually is able to get the better of that bad situation on both fronts, and they're able to pull what is all of this trash. They even snap these ghouls into Beryllia, and I think that this pull is a very interesting to see, and I think that that's how these teams are going to be able to do this dungeon very fast moving forward whenever they do have a clean run. But ultimately, it comes down to being clean, having good execution, and being able to recover from any tilt that you may have. And it happens. Like, everybody kind of has these runs in Sanguine Depths. If you've ever done this dungeon on live, I'm sure you've been in a run where you're stuck on the first boss. I mean, we've all been there.
Speak for yourself.
Say tilted at your team.
Liars. They're also liars as well.
That's right. There's people who've wiped horribly in Sanguine Depths all day, and then there's liars. Yep. It's a good way to put it there. But with that victory, Incarn's up 1. And now we start setting our sights on, I think this is the last... Oh, no, we have one more dungeon that we haven't seen. But we have Mists and Plaguefall that we haven't seen, and Mists is going to be our next dungeon here, Nagura.
Yeah, I'm actually really excited for Mist, just because that is a dungeon where we also have seen many different comps in Shadowlands MDI. I mean, we've went from Moonkins, where almost every team was running one, and then we went away from Moonkins again, and then they came back, and then there was Resto Druids, and people had just completely different ideas. Oh, we even had the priests as well, where they were mind controlling some of the mobs to get the extra damage on the first boss. So really, really like interesting strats. And then we had the hunters to make sure they can pull a lot of trash in the maze as well. So I wonder what kind of strategies they're coming up with here, because Mist is just one of those dungeons where you are really restricted in what you can do because of the maze like walls, but there's very like creative ways that these teams have figured out to actually basically circumvent those walls and try to get extra trash pulled in. And the affixes are pretty easy, right? We have bursting, storming, fortified, which isn't too hard, but it is a plus 23. So that really does make it extra hard with the trash having so much more HP and doing so much damage.
Yeah, and this is, one of the big dungeons that you kind of are playing sort of like the dungeons of old as well, if you played any challenge modes in the past, where it's kind of about hacking the dungeon. You're not supposed to be able to get through these walls or anything like that, Dratnos. You're supposed to be able to get out of combat, pull the next set, but this has been a dungeon that in order for any of these teams to really have a reasonable time for what we consider in the MDI, they have to be able to find these different ways around the dungeons, just like, we were so used to in MOP or WoD challenge modes.
Yeah, the maze, the way that it presents it to you of pulling one pack at a time, having a nice leisurely stroll, listening to Mist Caller's voice lines, doing the puzzle, talking with the rest of your group and having a discussion about, the flowers and the leaves and stuff, those sorts of things, is a little bit incongruous with the way that MDI players like to run the dungeons, right? They're just there like, oh, let's pull 40 mobs and get everything that we can all together all at once, do the maze like in 2 pulls if we can, so that is the tension there with the way the dungeon wants to be done and the way the teams want to do the dungeon.
Yep, and like you mentioned, it's just about looking at different ways to be able to get around it, because we saw like trinkets being used, we saw pets being used, we've seen like a ridiculous amount of things. Everything possible that players could try to dig up, they have to be able to get to that.
Yeah, and Incarnation and Team Name both have some of these players on their teams that I would describe as tech finders, where they will spend hours on end inside of dungeons just trying every single spot inside of a key to try to be able to poke as many holes through the maze or use as many trinkets or things to be able to pull additional packs into the maze. And ultimately, it's going to come down to how well teams have adapted to this new strategy and how well these teams are going to be able to perform on this 23 level, which is going to be a very slow key. Just with it being on that 23, a lot of these trash pulls are going to take a large portion of your time up, and being able to adapt and make routes that work for you is going to be super imperative.
Yeah. It absolutely will. And, Incarnation, they really want to be able to blitz through this. They can move on into that upper bracket, get themselves prepared for the next slate of dungeons. Because, when we're in this global finals, there's a ton of emphasis, of course, on knowing all the dungeons inside and out. But nothing ever stops. It always helps to be able to have that extra practice, especially when you can start reviewing how everybody else has been doing the dungeons. Because all 8 of the dungeons are going to be run on day 1. And now, for the first time this weekend, we're going to see Miss Eterna Scythe between Incarnation and Team Name, possibly deciding the series. So let's get into it between both these teams.
All right, I'm just excited to take a look at the compositions because we do know Incarnation specifically is one of those teams that comes up with special comps, especially for Mists. Were they running the Prot Paladin in this dungeon before? Do you remember? Or was that just Theater of Pain where they
I believe that was just Theater, and here, we actually have the variation, though, in multiple different spots between the two teams. Incarnation on a sort of magic damage-oriented composition here, with Dorky on that Vengeance Demon Hunter, and they're actually starting off with this Season 1 pull onto this first pack, whereas Team Name are instead on a physical damage comp. They have the Battle Shout from the Prop Warrior, the Mystic Touch from the Monk instead, and they're playing a entirely different type of damage. So these two comps, very different. Incarnation with the 2 different ways to amplify magic damage, right? Chaos Touch, or Chaos Brand, and Arcane Intellect instead. So very, very different ideas here.
And they're still running with that Venthyr Moonkin, so very interesting choice. You can see the Venthyr Moonkin basically soloing this first pack with those cooldowns being committed. That means, though, that they kind of need 3 minutes to spend on trash now before they go to the boss, if they want to have that cooldown for the boss available, right? Otherwise, they might have a hard time one-facing that boss, especially in a 23. They also are committing the Ashen Hollow here, so that almost means that they're not going to be one-facing the boss at this point. Not having the Venthyr cooldowns and the Ashen, that sounds like a very interesting or almost impossible to do the one-facing the boss. We'll see, though, as Team Name had a really significant pull on their side. They skipped that first pull, immediately went into that second trash area, pulled those 2 high HP mobs that they're dealing with right now, and the rest of the trash they already dealt with. They already killed the Tormentor too, so they picked up their first Anima power.
They did also commit their Ashen Hallow, but it was used a little bit earlier compared to where Incarnation did. So we'll see when these cooldowns end up coming up for the two teams. I am a little bit curious exactly how the first boss is going to work out, but you can see, on 23 Fortified, these mobs just have so much health. Both teams still working on these bow breakers. They just have so much HP. Incarnation actually going to commit Bop here so that they can keep everybody in and hitting these things rather than having to run out and outrange their thrashing. Meanwhile, Team Name just about finished off here with theirs. That's going to get them even on count with Incarnation. Incarnation will actually be taking the lead on count after these die because they did that bigger, very first pull of the dungeon. Team Name now getting straight into the boss. I'm curious here. Team Name had to wait a little bit for that boss to spawn. Maybe Incarnation will do that pull that is outside of this room while that RP is going on and try and claim a little bit of extra time by doing something like that. I'm not sure.
Yeah, very interesting. Looks like maybe Team Name is just saying that they don't need that Ashen for that boss. We'll see, because they have that Bloodlust that they saved all the way for this one. And it looks like they are also cleaving Ingra quite a lot. You can see Ingra is already down to 85%. So they definitely are trying to get Ingra quite a bit lower. Incarnation also engaging the boss now. Yoda has his cooldowns back up, so it was 3 minutes in between. They're also just not going to have the Ashen. And I think Incarnation is not going to have any issues whatsoever to one-face this, just because Yoda's cooldowns are going to be so strong. As long as it's being perfectly timed, you want to have the end of the Ravenous Frenzy within the Ingra window. And interestingly enough, Yoda is running Celestial Alignment, so he's not actually going with Incarnation here. He's going with Soul of the Forest, which is usually not something you do when you run Venthyr. So very interesting choice by Yoda.
Yeah, what is the trade-off there between those two? As you can see, wow, just look at this damage that Yoda is putting out. Is that damage coming from that talent choice? What's the trade-off?
No, you actually have more single target damage if you run with Incarnation. If you
I guess
don't
they have
run
more than
Incarnation,
enough.
you have more AoE damage. It's more
Yeah.
consistent AoE damage outside of your cooldowns because your Starfire does more cleave damage. So Yoda is going to have a little bit more damage outside the DPS, the cooldown window, which maybe is the reason why he's running with it, because of course during this maze, whenever cooldowns are down, then the Moonkin is really not going to be shining. You can see Yoda, of course, not topping the damage meters here whenever these pulls are happening.
Yeah, both teams getting started here at the bottom of the stairs. Incarnation, though, in a solid lead. They gained about 10 seconds from the first boss split, mostly off the strength of just killing the boss so quickly, and they have 5 extra percent from that first pull being done differently, so they're going to be able to do the rest of the dungeon with a little bit more flexibility as compared to Team Name. We'll see how it all evens out, though. My guess is that the Team Name comp is going to be better at just dealing with the average pull a little bit faster, because again, you can see Incarnation kind of playing with one less DPS player, Yoda just sort of being there, being present until the cooldowns come back up, and not really doing much else.
Yeah, I think that's going to be the difference between Incarnation and Team Name. Because of the composition, you're going to see Incarnation is probably going to pull ahead whenever they have those cooldowns available, and outside of the cooldowns, Team Name is going to have a lot more consistent damage, right? Their comp has a lot of consistent damage with the Hunter, Windwalker, and Rogue, while Incarnation is really reliant on those cooldowns, on the Ashen from the Paladin and the Incarnation from, or the Celestial Alignment plus Ravenous Frenzy from the Moonkin. You can see they are pulling Varuth now on top of the next trash pull. Team Name doing the same thing. I really like this variation, because a lot of teams in the past would pull Varuth first as soon as they are done with the first boss, and then once Varuth is a bit lower, they would pull trash on top of it. But I really like skipping Varuth at first and then pulling it further into the maze. I think it's a little bit more efficient if you can pull it off, and it looks like both of the teams are doing so by committing the Ashen Hell from both of the Paladins.
Yeah, this is a cool little adaptation there. You can see Incarnation still in the lead here, but it is not a huge lead. Team Name right on their heels, getting into this next room as well. Both teams getting started with this pull. This pull is a little bit difficult to manage because of the different mobs here. You've got these defenders that just have extra health compared to the rest of the pull, and you have the Stalker that's just leaping out of the group and biting people if you're not careful. Beautiful, beautiful cheap shot there, though, by Junkrat in his Shadow Dance, so he's allowed to press that button, preventing the Stalker from doing that misfailed bite. Not only keeping it in the group so it gets damaged nice and quickly, but also saving life from whoever would be targeted by that. And they've also pulled some extra mobs into here, both teams have, to increase the size and the efficiency of this pull.
Yeah, and it looks like Yoda did also manage to use his cooldowns here, but it looked like he's not getting the full use of it, because he used it like when the mobs were at 50% HP, I would say. So he probably had some time left of his cooldowns whenever this pack died. So not as that's usually why Venthyr Moonkins are really good for high keys, but then on lower keys they lose a lot of value because their cooldowns are just so long and they're backloaded cooldowns, so most of your damage is coming out at the end. And most of the time the trash just doesn't have enough HP to live so long to actually get that value. And that's exactly what we've seen just now from Yoda there. The trash died while the cooldowns were still running, unfortunately. But of course, they have planned those pulls around Yoda's cooldowns. So I would say that the next couple of uses should be getting that full value out. And you can see they caught up on trash percentage quite a bit. They're up to 45% now, while Team Name is at 38%. So Incarnation, I would say half a trash pull ahead at this point compared to Team Name.
Yeah, it's not an insurmountable lead by any stretch, but it is a noticeable one. Incarnation working on that frog now, while Team Name's still finishing off some trash before heading down into that room. So almost a full frog's health bar separating the teams now. That is quite a bit of extra damage there, but both teams on the same trash count. Team Name have added some extra trash to their path to get to this point. And so, assuming they can add some trash to this frog, which they have, yeah, you can see the pet returning after a successful mission there, they should be able to keep this lead to half a trash pull, as you said. Incarnation, though, very quickly going to be making their way into the next room. Junkrat actually burning Vanish there to drop combat so that they can just open the door and leave that straggler behind, rather than having to fight it by itself. Unfortunately, there is a tender in this room. This tender was part of a pull that they had already pulled through a wall, but somehow the tender didn't join that pull. And so they're going to have to finish off this tender before they can open the next door. That's going to slow their progression here a little bit, perhaps opening the door to Team Name getting back into this thing.
Yeah, and unfortunately we had a death on Team Name's side. Curry going down on the Windwalker. That was a pretty unfortunate scenario, because what happened was that Curry did get hit by that jump from the Gorge Gullet, which does a lot of initial damage, and then it leaves behind a poison debuff. And Igloo dispelled the poison debuff, but then he got the other debuff from the other mob, the magic debuff that just kills you if you don't dispel it. So there was no dispel there, and Curry just went down to the debuff running out, unfortunately. But they did get everyone back to the pool now, so they are able to recover. But Incarnation pretty far ahead at this point, as they're already fighting Mistcaller with all of this trash on top. Both of the teams actually going with the Volcanic Plume anima power, which is really helpful for these kind of pulls. You can see the mobs just constantly being thrown into the air, really helping out with interrupts and damage as well, of course.
Yeah, the trampoline effect there, just keeping them bouncing the whole time, although Incarnation now are going for a while without a proc and letting those mobs actually casting their Stampede out to the side there as they keep working on Mistcaller, though. Looks like they skipped the first ad phase. No, they didn't, right? They actually were doing that earlier, right? I know some teams are able to actually skip the Mistcaller ad phases, though. I've heard whispers of that possibility. Team Name not having it happen on their side either. Jack will explain it like there's some guaranteed way to do it, but I'm not smart enough to really understand it. There's some way that you just do enough damage to the boss before it starts casting it, where it'll just be like, oh, okay, I'm low enough health now that I don't have to worry about casting this. And then the 10% one, you just try and kill the boss before it actually finishes the cast, is my understanding of how it all works.
Alright, so it looks like they definitely tried to skip that last phase, because Yoda just now popped his Ravenous Frenzy, and right after he popped his Celestial Alignment. So they should be able to have enough stacks from Yoda to be able to skip that, unless you get really unfortunate timing. You can see Yoda is ramping with spamming those rafts, pulling that Astral Power to just spam those Star Surges, but the guessing game is casting, and it looks like they didn't manage 3% of the boss. Yeah, so sometimes if you get unfortunate timing, you will just have the Mistcaller cast Guessing Game as soon as the boss hits 10%. But if the Mistcaller is casting another spell while it gets below 10%, then it will finish that cast before casting the Guessing Game. But because Yoda, of course, can't stop damage with the Venthyr cooldowns running, that would be a pretty big loss of damage, and it would also stop you from ramping. So you kind of just have Yoda not being able to stop, and they just ended up being an unfortunate timing for them.
Yeah, Incarnation now heading around the side of the map. They are not going to be waiting for that heartbeat to go. They are instead just going to be using their broomsticks and slow falling down. Junkrat here, actually on a stealth mission. Going to take the longest slow fall here to get to this second platform. Maybe start the combat with this stuff. Maybe land a sap on one of these insects to prevent it from getting involved in this pull, because those insects can be pretty scary. Actually, they want the insects. They sapped them so they'd be right where they were gonna get the pull all together. And this is gonna be a huge pull. No Moonkin cooldowns, but basically everything, actually not really, basically no cooldowns, just Frostmage sustained damage is what they're gonna be relying on to get through this massive 23 fortified AoE pull at the end of the dungeon. This sort of thing is so scary. This is the kind of pull that we see so many teams struggle with. You can see the mob's health bars are just going down so slowly. They are making progress. No deaths so far, but a lot of mechanics they have to keep managing here.
Yeah, this is the problem when you're running both the Rogue and the Moonkin, right? The Rogue does have a lot of single target damage, priority target damage, but lacking in AoE compared to some other classes that we are seeing. And then, of course, Moonkin without cooldowns, kind of the same thing, just sitting there, trying to do as much as he can, but just really lacking that damage outside of cooldowns. Cryptics dropping incredibly low with all of those Reaver debuffs coming out. They do have Yoda that can help dispelling that poison to be able to just be safe. And then on top of that, you also have the bursting coming out. You can see everyone's struggling to survive as the Ice Log is being used by Cryptics, plus they lay on hand as well. So overlapping some cooldowns here. And you can see bursting just stacking up on everybody. Yoda, of course, not being able to play Dwarf because Druid unfortunately cannot be a dwarf, so you don't have that extra cooldown available to get rid of your stacks. And Moonkin's also not having an immunity, so I would say that Yami is probably saving all of those magic dispels to save Yoda, because he's like the only one who can't get rid of those stacks.
Yeah, these dispels are important in this area, especially if they're used intelligently, right? And if you fire them off on the people who are actually in danger, not just people with a stack and a defensive. But you can see Incarnation are looking to pull all the rest of this trash into the boss. 2 Tormentor debuffs active, increased physical damage taken. Going to be very scary for Dorky. He pre-pops his Metamorphosis to try and mitigate this as best as he can. He's also going to try and avoid getting autoed by those mobs as much as possible and sort of just kite them around the hitbox of the boss. Fell Devastation is going to be next to try and keep him up. Ashen Hallow, Moonkin cooldowns, everything is going to come down. They need to make sure they're not taking too much damage, though, during this. The boss entering that first consumption phase as they have some larvae coming in from the boss now. Those are going to be especially scary with the increased physical damage taken on the entire group as well. A lot of those heat-seeking predictive attacks coming out from the boss as well needs to be dodged. So far, though, everybody at full health. Growl not even really having to do much healing here for Incarnation, and are going down for team name on this boss as well. They put down the marker for where to battle res, but unlike Incarnation, they don't have a druid, so they have to actually just cast the battle res the hard way, and this is going to be so much pressure for team name. Somehow, multiple players sub 10%, they look like they're going to be able to maybe recover, but I don't know if it's going to be enough. Incarnation here are ramping up. Well, no longer ramping, I guess. The Moonkin cooldowns are over.
Yeah, so they're missing a little bit of trash, actually. They're up to 99%. They're going to have to get one more thing. Maybe they can pull the next trash pack in the corner here and just kill one of the larvae to be able to get the last percentage that they need. But yeah, they have a lot of damage. You can see the boss is just melting from all of those cooldowns that they have been committing, and it looks very clean by Incarnation. This is really a run that we want to see from them after that Sanguine Depths. That didn't go so well. Definitely a lot cleaner in this mist, and a really fast time too, as they're trying to finish off the boss here, and they're going to be looking for the last bit of percent that they need to finish up this dungeon. You can see the skull marker is already out, and that larva that is going to be dying in just a second, and it is going to be Incarnation winning against Team Name 2-0.
That's right. We are seeing, just the death of the side of Igloo there for team name. But Incarnation going to be taking the sweep and moving on through the upper bracket at this point. Team name going to be dropping down to the lower. And, what we were looking at going into this as well,